before, if you have any questions at any point, if you're joining from Zoom, please use the Q&A feature. Type your questions in there. If you're joining us from Facebook, just type those questions into the comment section. Also, if you're joining us on Facebook right now, if you would take a quiz, it's in the pre-survey. It's in the comment section. Click on that before we take our tour. It takes 2 seconds. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to my counterpart, Hallie Yakubishin. She's another registered dietitian, and she's going to moderate today's tour.
Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to have you here. This is a real treat that we get to tour this very unique dairy farm. I should start by saying thank you for being here. The fact that you took an hour out of your day to spend with us does not go unnoticed. I want to give you a heads up of what to expect during this tour. The majority of the time, we're going to spend live on farm with Kim Brown, Dairy Assistant Coordinator, learning how they farm right here at NCA&T. I should add that our dairy farmer, Corey Burgess, who we had planned on being here today, is stuck in an airport and won't be able to join us. But the awesome news is that Dr. Lauren Mayo, Research Assistant Professor of Dairy Science, will be joining us as well today, in addition to Kim, to help answer questions. Let's just all take a minute and give huge props to the women stepping up to help make today happen. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So what I've learned from doing these tours, and I've done a lot of them both in person and virtual, is that people often leave asking, this farm is great, but are all dairy farms like this? So with that in mind, we'll be also sharing a sneak peek at what is happening on some of our other farms across the Southeast. And no, not all dairy farms are the same, but they do all prioritize cow care and conserving resources. Additionally, I hope to share some dairy-related nutrition information that help highlights the role dairy foods can play across the lifespan. To help me with this, we have registered dietitian and Vice President of Scientific Affairs, Kuda Makumashaninga, online as well, who's going to help answer any questions at the end. With that said, let me stop talking so we can get to Kim before you tell me where we're starting. Kim, can you share a little bit about yourself and how you found yourself on this dairy farm?
All right, my name is Kimberly Brown, and I am the Dairy Assistant Coordinator here on A&T University Farm. I am from Wilson, North Carolina, which is about an hour and a half away from Greensboro. I moved up here back in 2017. I wanted as well, let me go back. When I moved up here, I was a CNA. Was able to get my CNA license and start my career up here. I wanted to do humanitarian work. So at the time, I wanted to work at the soup kitchen, but I was juggling 2 jobs, and neither one of my jobs will give me the schedule that I will need to be able to fluctuate between those 2 jobs and working at the soup kitchen. So I continue working on, and eventually I started volunteering out here at the farm. I started out in poultry and made my way to the swine unit, and then before I could make my way to any other units on the farm, I was offered a position here at the dairy unit.
You must have made a good impression.
Ma'am?
I said you must have made a good impression.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, I don't want to cut you off. So please continue to share, about yourself as we go through the tour, because we just love hearing about people that are actually doing the work on the farms. But let's kind of talk a little bit about where you are now. Okay. You are in front of, I believe, are these cows about to have babies?
Yes. So we're in front of the maternity herd. Right now we have 8 of the heifers in here. We have one that was due October 17th, and she haven't calved just yet. So we just been keeping a close eye on her, as well as everybody else that's in the pasture. So the girls that's behind me, they have access to an automatic water tank, as well as they have access to grain, grazing grass, corn silage, and 1 round bale of hay.
And what about, so when do they go in this pen? So they're about to give a baby, like at what point do they go up here?
All right, so they come up to the closest pen within like a month of their due date.
Okay. And anything special you're doing for that cow that you've been waiting since the 17th to have their baby?
Not necessarily, other than making sure that we keep a close eye on her. So it's between me, Corey, and the students, Dr. Mayo as well, and any other volunteers that work on the dairy unit. So we just make sure we monitor this close-up pasture for the
Okay.
most part.
And how old is a cow when they have their first calf?
So you said how old are?
Yeah, how old is a cow when they have their first calf?
So I think I know the gestation period is for 9 months, but them first having their first calf within 2 years, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And does their diet have to change like during this phase of life, or do they get the same diet that the rest of the herd gets?
No, so their diet do change.
Oh, their diet.
Yes, so they're dried off and put in the maternity pasture. Their grain is different than the milking herd grain, and they also get a round bale of hay. The milking herd doesn't get round bales of hay. So that will be the difference, the grain and the hay, but they still have access to grazing grass, of course, the water, and the silage. So in their silage, they just get plain silage with no alfalfa bale mixed in, and none of the lactated grain is mixed inside their grain. So it's a different type of grain.
Sure. So they have different needs, I guess, in different phases of life, kind of like humans.
Yeah.
Let's move on and talk a little bit about the actual calves. Maybe on our way there, we'll visit the calf barn. I know if some were out near the fence, we were going to look at those as well. Unfortunately, they don't have any calves right now in the actual where they keep them. But on our way there, we're actually going to do a poll, a little fun poll, start talking a little bit about you guys and all of our viewers. So what is your favorite dairy food? We got cheese, yogurt, ice cream. This is always a hard one for me. I think it depends on the day. Kim, what's your favorite dairy food?
Ice cream.
Ice cream. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Since we want everyone to benefit from the nutrients dairy foods provide, the Dairy Alliance provides education on how to manage lactose intolerance too. We know that the estimated prevalence of lactose intolerance in the US is about 36%. That's more than 1 out of every 3 people. Okay, so our results came in. We've got cheese and ice cream almost at a tie. So that's not too surprising. Furthermore, genetics and ethnicity do play a role. People of color, Native Americans, among others, are much more likely to experience lactose intolerance than people of European descent. But the good news is, as you can see from this graph, lactose-free milk is just as nutritious. It has the same 13 essential nutrients. You've got things like natural cheeses, which have very, very small amounts of lactose. So there are options. But we know that lactose intolerance, we're going to get back to the farm. It's not the only reason people may not feel comfortable consuming dairy foods. So another reason might be the uncertainty of what that dairy cow's life looks like. So that's why we're here today. So Kim, tell us a little bit about where we are now, what happens in this barn.
So right now we're standing in our calf barn. So when the heifer's calf, normally eventually we'll bring the calf down to the calf barn, and here they will spend their time living down here. We have shavings that we put down for the calves, as well as they have access to buckets of water that we normally fill daily, as well as eventually when they're weaned off of milk, they will have access to hay. So we normally keep hay down here, the grass hay down here, as well as extra shavings and some of our tools that we use to clean our dairy pens down here. And we have a few fans that we have down here that we will be using when it's hot to keep the heifers and the bulls pretty cool.
Okay, I think we're the viewers are getting to see some video of some of the older calves. So tell us a little bit about at what age do they leave this barn and then go somewhere else?
So I want to say around like 8 to 10 weeks, they're moved from the calf barn up to the blue barn, where they're spending majority of their time until they're put into a larger pasture. So there,
Okay.
they're grazing. They're introduced to grass for the first time, like pasture. So the different forages that is
Mhm.
in that pasture, as well as they also have a automatic water tank as well.
And what's the benefit to keeping them kind of separate in this separate area? They kind of each have their own little, what I think of as like a little nursery or bassinet, kind of when I think of little tiny newborns. What's the benefit to that?
So one of the benefits is that when they're down here, and by them being older, they tend to kind of trample over the younger girls. When it comes to eating, we noticed that in the past we had some of our young calves that wouldn't eat right away because we have older young calf that will basically bother her while she's trying to eat or when he's trying to eat. So that's one of the benefits. So that way they're able to get the amount of nutrition that they are supposed to get at the ages that they are.
Sure. And they receive colostrum as well, right? I mean, isn't
They
it
do.
that they kind of are building up their immune system until they are let loose, if you will?
Yes. So they normally have colostrum bottles for about 5 days.
Okay.
And jerseys normally, calves normally, um, starting out have a bottle of 2 quarts, and Holstein calves start out with a bottle of 4 quart bottles because they're larger when they're
They're
born,
larger.
larger calves. Hmm.
And real quick before we move on, you mentioned kind of you've got two different breeds of dairy cows on the farm.
Yes.
Why is that? What are the difference between the two?
So we originally used to have Holsteins, which are the black and white cows.
Mm-hmm.
But we find that Jersey cows, they have A2 milk as well as a higher percentage of butter fat. And we'll be using a small percentage of the Jersey uh, herd milk for our up and coming ice cream parlor that we'll be eventually getting. So the difference between the two, the Holsteins, which are the black and white cows, they pretty much produce a large quantity of milk out of all the dairy breeds. Whereas the Jersey breed, they do well in like higher climates of like heat. So
Mm-hmm.
they do really well in heat, as well as they have the A2 milk and the butter fat. And they also are really good mothers too.
Mm.
Hmm.
So I think I've seen this a lot on farms that have their own creamery. They're opening, selling ice cream. That you're going to see more
Yes.
Jerseys on that farm than you are maybe Holsteins. Not always, but I've seen that a lot as I've been to different farms. And you mentioned that A2 milk, if you're not familiar, that's referring to the type of protein that's in that milk. If you've seen the A2 milk in the grocery stores, there's kind of anecdotal reports that some people tolerate that better. And
Hmm.
so kind of as a dietitian, my thought there is it has the same 13 essential nutrients. If you feel like that is better tolerated for you, then there's nothing wrong with choosing that product. But there's not a ton of great research to support that just yet, but no harm in trying. But much like a fragile newborn baby, you can see here with the calves that calf health is a huge priority for farmers. So at our next stop, we're going to address some of the ways that they implement sustainability here on the farm. So on our way, we're going to peek at some of our other dairy farmers in the Southeast and what they are doing.
We've taken an industry that back in the 50s, we had 50 million dairy cattle in the United States. And today we're producing more milk with 9.5 million cows.
We've gotten more sustainable and reduced our carbon footprint as an industry tremendously.
North America is the only place in the world that has increased our milk production while decreasing our greenhouse gas emissions, making us the lowest emitters per gallon of milk in the world.
As dairy farmers, we are good stewards of the land. We want to be the good neighbors upstream. So we are very conscious of what we do, and that's why we have our best management practices.
Today we have to collect the waste from the cows and we have to store it until we can agronomically put it out on the fields, so that we manage the soils properly so we get the most bang for our buck, but we also don't pollute the streams.
That irrigation is like gold to that corn plant. It's got the nutrients plus the moisture all at the same time. It's kind of a closed loop system.
All of our cows wear an SCR collar, and it's basically a Fitbit for cows. It feeds back to a computer system that tells me how well she's eating, how much milk she gave that day, so we can individualize our cow care that way.
All of these things combined with the personal touch is what makes a dairy run. A high-producing cow and a well-managed cow that's comfortable, she will make almost twice as much milk on half as much feed.
As you can see, our farmers are making more milk with less resources, and cow care and comfort is one of the key strategies to doing that. So in addition to cow care, breeding, technology, and optimized diet are all contributing to dairy farmers' ability to increase cow productivity. So it looks like we've made it to the barn. So Kim, can you tell us what you made here and how this area is used?
So this right here is our freestall barn. These are for our cows, of course, but it's like equivalent to a living room for us. They have their bedding, which have shavings on there. They're able to come in and relax if they want to. They also have access to cool fans that we normally turn on. It's pretty hot, so we try to make sure we pay attention to the weather to be sure that these girls stay cool. As well as they have their feed, this is our feed bump right here. So in their feed, we normally mix corn silage that we normally use. The corn silage, we get it off our own farm. So we have a few pastures that we use to make sure that they have feed. As well as also in their feed, they also get grain. So that's the lactating grain. And they get alfalfa square bills. And we put it in the tub grinder and mix it up real good for them. Want to make sure that it's at a good size for them to be able to break it down and, eat. And we try to make sure that we push the silage up as often as we can today. They also have access to 3 water tanks, with 2 of them being automatic, and 1 of them being one that we have to fill up on our own, as well as they have 3 salt blocks. Because they don't have sodium in their diet, they have access to salt blocks, which is on the other side of the freestalls, so they can get that percentage of sodium in their body.
Sure. And what about why is it so important to keep them comfortable? Like if they get too hot, does that affect like their milk production?
Yes, it will affect their milk production.
So do you see a decline in that over the summertime?
Me personally, not necessarily. No, I haven't.
Yeah, okay. And what about, I think you mentioned this, but what happens to the manure in that area? Where does it go?
So normally we scrape the manure in the waste shed. And from there, we normally spread the manure onto the pastures with the manure spreader. Okay. We don't do it every day, but we make sure we scrape multiple times a day. Mm-hmm. But as the shed barn fills up with manure, we spread it. And also too, we have people that come from the community that want to get some of our manure to dry out and use for future planting. So they come up here and get a bag of our manure and on the house and use it for their own personal use.
Sure. And so talking a little bit about more about their diet, I think one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, and we'll talk a little bit more about this and hopefully bring Dr. Mayo in to give her kind of input too, but that this is a research farm. So it's a little bit different, and your farm is considered a pasture-based system. So can you explain a little bit about what that means and what that looks like at your farm?
So pasture-based means that they have access to the different forages in the pastures that we normally put them in. We try to rotate them out like every 3 days. As far as if they wasn't on pasture-based and that was more freestyle, this is where they'll spend all of their time. But they have the option to graze the forages in the pasture, as well as come up here and get some of this good old corn silage.
Okay. And did you mention, I think one thing that I never thought about before I started working with dairy farmers was that not only is there the aspect of the animal care with the dairy cows, but there's also dairy farmers have to know how to grow the crops that are being fed to the cows. So remind me, what are you growing on farm for the animals, and what are you for the cows, and what are you bringing in?
So what we're growing on the farm is our hay, alfalfa hay, as well as the grass hay. Also, we are growing the corn for the corn silage. What we bringing in is the grain.
Okay. And do you know what some of those components are in the grain?
So the grain that they're getting at the robot, it doesn't necessarily have any nutritional value, but the grain that the maternity herd get has soybean oil in it, is one of the byproducts that is in their grain.
And who helps you guys make those decisions about what to feed the cows? Is it just you and Corey kind of deciding, or is there anyone else involved?
No, so we have a nutritionist, Dr. Jordan. She come out and she meet with us, and we go over what the next process will looks like with the girls.
Mm-hmm. Will you
when
share
it comes to their nutritional value?
Yeah, you shared an interesting story when I talked with you about how you had this aha moment about your herd size after she recently visited. Could you share that with the group?
Say that again.
You shared an interesting story earlier about how you felt like the cows weren't eating enough, but then after Dr. Jordan came out, you learned what was going on.
So we normally a clean the feed bucket, but we noticed that the total mix ratio that we was using was for 30 cows, and then we have 26 cows. So that was one of the reasons that they wasn't eating all of their silage.
Sure. It kind of reminds me of the dietitians here will know what I'm talking about, like a calorie count. When you guys come and see how much food was eaten, that's kind of the cow's version of the cow. Okay, well that's awesome. And I think you alluded to it, but there's a lot of byproducts that dairy farmers are using to also feed cows, things like the soybean hulls that you talked about, distiller grains, so basically what's left over from making beer and alcohol, cottonseed, which is left over from making t-shirts, and all of that can help reduce food waste and methane emissions in landfills. I just love to think that dairy cows can take these foods and nutrients that humans can't use and turn them into a product like milk that provides 8 grams of high quality protein in just one serving. So on our way to our next stop, we're going to have another poll question. I see we got a couple questions related to this stop, so we will definitely get to those. Don't worry. Okay, what percentage of United States greenhouse gas emissions does dairy contribute? What do you think? So if you answered less than 2%, then you are correct. As we've learned, sustainability has come a long way on dairy farms. Dairy farmers work hard to go greener by reducing greenhouse gases, optimizing water use, and increasing soil health. But there's always room for improvement, and that's why the U.S. dairy industry has committed to being greenhouse gas neutral or better by 2050. In addition to the practices we talked about today, things like methane digesters that are becoming increasingly popular are all paving the way to make that a possibility. So, but that's not the only exciting technology popping up in dairy farms. So we're at our next stop, and I'm really eager for Kim to share the unique way they milk their cows here at North Carolina A&T. So can you tell everyone where we are now?
So right now we're in the robot room. This is where everything happens. This is where the girls get milk. We're just standing on the opposite side of where they go to the robot to be milked. So this is our automatic robot right here. It only milks one cow at a time. The benefits of the VMS versus the old robot is that it's able to monitor her conductivity, as well as it gives off very detailed reports on the computer, with one of them being it shows the activity of each cow while it was in there. It would also even show what teat they didn't get missed. As far as our own milk pit, even though it was able to milk 4 of the cows at one time, we have to be down there. So we're not able to leave them and basically do pasture management. We have to stay there and make sure that all the cows are milked before we start another task. But as far as the robot, we set the girls up on one side for them to be able to come into the robot, and we able to carry on and do pasture-based management.
Now, this is really cool, and I feel like you have mentioned a few things that maybe some of our viewers might not understand kind of what that.
Okay.
So the conductivity, what does that show? What does that tell you?
So that's the mastitis shown in the calf.
So if they're sick, that kind of the robot's able to basically give you a red flag of, hey, this cow is not doing well. Yes. Okay. That's really cool. And some of the questions we've gotten ahead of time are, how do you fight infections when milking cows? Is one of them. So let's start with that one.
Okay. So normally we get their milk tested, a somatic cell count, which is their blood cell count. And then once we get the results back, we normally will treat them. And then within 24 hours, they get their second treatment. And then we pretty much monitor. So we used to send the girls through the robot for milking, but to save on time, because between each one of our mastitis cows, the robot washes for 12 minutes. So to cut down on the time, we run all the mastitis cows through the old milk pit, and that's where we milk them. One of the things that we do is we do a CMT testing, which is basically testing each one of their teats to see if they still have mastitis in whichever teat they have mastitis in.
And what kind of things are you doing? Like, does the actual robot do to make sure that the cow's udders stay healthy? Because there's a lot that goes into that, right? Like with the iodine dip and just keeping them like clean before milking.
So, yes. So the process that the robot does is the cow has a tag on her ear and it identifies her. So once she come in, it accepts her, and then it do a post dip. Post dip, it cleans the teeth, and the post dip. After the post dip, her teeth is clean, and then from there the cups are put onto her teeth, and she's milked. And then at the end, she get iodine put on her teeth to kind of as a protection.
Mm-hmm. So we also got a question that's kind of, are there a certain number of years a cow is allowed to work, I guess, if you will? And I guess maybe you could just speak to, how do you know when a cow is ready to retire from being a dairy cow?
If Dr. Mayo could help me out with that, I appreciate it.
Yeah, Dr. Mayo, do you have any kind of thing you could add with that? Someone wants to know, like, they want to know if there are regulations for how long a cow is milked. So if you could speak to that and just how you know when it's time for them to retire.
So Kim and Corey do such a great job that our cows just keep going. Last year we had a Jersey that was 15 years and had about 12 calves. And that was most of that just their good management overall, and keeping her healthy, whether it comes to the udder or reproductively. The average on most farms right now is about 7 years for cows in the United States. And so that's about 5 calves in their lifetime.
Okay. And what's the general lifespan of a dairy cow? I know that was another question that we got.
So what kind of is different, most people don't understand. And so for each year that a cow is alive, usually, like Kim said, she has her first calf at about 2 years of age. And then from there, she'll have a calf each year. And so as she does that, usually as long as she's still calving and she doesn't have any health issues, similar to that cow that I mentioned that was 15 years on our farm, she'll continue to stay in the herd. There are different reasons as to why we'll pretty much change her career, so to speak. And if she has leg issues, feet issues, or issues if she continuously has mastitis, we don't continue to milk her. And so like Kim said, we do monthly tests to check and see if they have elevated somatic cell counts, which would indicate the mastitis. And then we also individually test each quarter or each teat from the udder to also see if there's a specific pathogen. And there are specific pathogens that the cows can heal on their own. There's some that we have to treat with antibiotics, and then some that are not treatable. And so in that case, she has to make a career change if they're non-treatable. And so that usually is the reason for cows leaving the herd sooner than that 5 to 7 year period.
And I know we always get the question, kind of what happens to a dairy cow after it's a dairy cow. And in many cases, it becomes a beef cow. Is that correct?
Correct. So a lot of, well, there's a combination now because the dairy industry is probably increasing on what we call beef on dairy. So beef from the dairy industry can either come from a cull cow or a cow that's hit retirement, or we have cows that may have difficulty getting pregnant, and so they're bred to beef breed instead. And so rather than having an influx of bulls that are not marketable, they then can go since they are partial beef breed. So both of those are options so the dairy industry actually provides quite a bit of beef to the United States currently.
And then I'm going to ask you this other question while I have you here. And that is, what does an animal nutrition need training wise to help out on a dairy farm?
So like Kim said, Dr. Jordan actually visited us. Today's Thursday. On Tuesday, she comes monthly. Dr. Jordan is also a licensed veterinarian in large animals, so we're lucky to have both of those in her. Most animal scientists that become nutritionists, it varies. They could graduate with a bachelor's degree in animal science or specifically dairy cattle nutrition, which universities still have that as a program. And then they can go directly into the industry and can, start getting on the job training, so to speak, when it comes to nutrition with that specific company. But there's also a variety of nutritionists that either have masters or PhDs or DVMs. So it really varies on what they're doing on a day-to-day basis, whether they're balancing rations. Dr. Jordan is able to do that complete picture for us. So she not only is able to look at the ration and tell us we need a little bit more of this or a little bit more of that vitamin or mineral, but she can also really evaluate the animals and see if that feed is effective for them to stay healthy and productive.
Sure. And I know that, what was I going to ask you? This is the question I was going to ask you. We got some questions around hormones, and earlier I know I was talking to Kim and she said she'd love some backup on this too, but talk to us a little bit about RBST, why there's kind of fear out there around hormones, and why, and what would, if you're a dietitian that you have someone that's afraid to consume dairy because of that, what might you say to them?
So it's a great question. And currently I teach dairy cattle production, and it's funny you ask this question because I took them to the grocery store, pick up all the different types of dairy products. And then we brought them back and had a taste test, and we read every single carton. Because there is a lot of marketing out there, right, that a lot of people are unsure. And so unless you become educated or look more into it, it seems scary. And so that's a totally valid concern. However, RBST is recombinant bovine somatotropin. So it was a recombinant hormone created quite a long ago that they found was essentially just a recombinant form of a natural occurring growth hormone. And so the idea behind that was that when those cattle received that during their peak of lactation, which is around 70 to 150 days of milk, that they not only would increase in longevity, but also increase in milk production. And so as we've gone through, that didn't really last long. And so we're talking 20 decades, or not 20 decades, 20 years, so 2 decades. Most RBST hasn't been on the market because, as you know, most cooperatives, so ours is Maryland, Virginia, have listened to consumers. And so now in the United States, most cooperatives don't purchase milk from RBST treated cows. There's been several research studies that have showed that because of the recombinant form of the bovine somatotropin, that there is not similarities in the human growth hormone, and therefore there is no concern that if you were to consume that milk, that you would get taller or reach puberty faster, right? But despite that research being found, and we know that for a fact now with several research globally, consumers are still concerned about it. And I don't know if you meant to also ask about other hormones. So our cows typically go through hormone therapies in a sense, more for reproductive purposes only. And so that's the only type. And in that case, that usually is an extreme method that we go to. Most of the time, we like to use visual methods to detect animals when they're receptive to breeding, and to either put them in with a bull or to go through with artificial insemination. One of the nice things about this system that Kim is standing next to with our automated milking system, we actually have the ability to, in the future, add some inline sensors that will give us an idea of those things without having to probably be as invasive or having to use hormone treatments. But for now, all of them are approved by the FDA and do not end up in the milk.
Sure. Yeah. I think that you were speaking, and we'll kind of move on now and talk and go to the tank room and see where that milk is stored. But talking about the labels, I think is really a lot of confusion, especially working with, talking to the public as a dietitian. You see that one product says antibiotic free and one doesn't. And then it makes you think, well, wait, if it doesn't say that, does that mean it has it in it? So on that note, we're going to do a little poll, true or false. It's illegal for milk to contain antibiotics. It should be a quick and hopefully easy one. It is true, despite whether a dairy food product makes an antibiotic claim or not, consumption in the U.S. no dairy food for consumption in the U.S. can legally contain antibiotics. So, Kim, can you tell us what happens in the tank room and what you have to kind of monitor in here?
So in our tank room, we have our sanitary system. So this washes the old system. So when we have mastitis cows, we have to run the system through a wash before we can actually use it to milk the girls that have mastitis. Also, we have 2 milk filters that we normally change one at a time. It alternates right now. You can see filter 1 needs changing, it's blinking, but the robot is running off of filter 2 right now. So once I change filter 1, eventually the robot will switch to filter 1 and filter 2 when need changing. Lastly, we have in here is partial of our milk tank. The rest of the milk tank is in the other rooms, really large. But here, this is where our milk is stored. Normally, Maryland, Virginia come and pick it up every 3 days. And they also sign off on the days that they come, as well as they clean our milk tank when they come and pick up our milk. We used to clean our milk tank, but now they make sure that they clean our milk tank out. And when they do come and pick up the milk, because the temperature be in the 50s or 60s, the settings has to be dropped back down so that way the milk tank can be back down to 37 degrees to keep the milk cool until they come and pick it up again.
Sure. And I think we've already kind of alluded to this a little bit, but some of the questions we got through, and I think it's because of our audience, we get these questions from patients, clients, how can I reassure someone about, the safety of the milk I'm drinking? And I think part of it is milk is so highly regulated and tested. So maybe you could talk a little bit about, when it's picked up, like, are they getting any sort of like samples to make sure that, and then what are kind of the repercussions if for by chance antibiotics did end up, let's say, in the milk supply at the processor? Like, would they know which farm it came from?
So normally when they come and pick up the milk, yes, the milk is tested. That's how they'll be able to find if we're milking a cow that has mastitis and her milk is going into the milk tank. They will be able to find that. They do have other companies, a few other companies that they have on their route as well as ours when they come. But it's very important because it's a big ordeal. Because if our milk is contaminated, we're also contaminating the other company milk that they're going to go pick up. And if they do find that we have contaminated milk, we will be fined for it.
That's another thing that I did not realize before I visited my first dairy farm. So just how much testing goes into it. And so I think we've got a lot of really good questions to kind of get to that just talk about dairy foods as a whole in the industry. So we're going to move on now to our last stop. But on our way there, Kim, can you speak to the fact we did get a question about, are the cow's teeth cleaned?
Their teeth?
Yeah.
Or their teeth?
Their teeth, like chomping teeth.
So we don't necessarily clean their teeth. We don't brush their teeth. The most cleaning to get done is when they're eating salad or grazing the grass. So that alone probably cleans their teeth, but we personally don't clean their teeth. But in the future, we're looking to do foot baths for them, foot therapy for the cows. We just haven't got around to it just yet.
Like a little pedicure?
Something like that.
Okay. We also got a question of how many calves do you have? I know we don't have any that were in their separate stalls, but how many were in the field that you had there?
So we have 11 calves, young calves, but we have 8 that are in the maternity herd, heifers that we have 3 that are due we have 1 due this month, which is October 17th, and then we have 3 or 4 due in November, and the rest are due in December.
Okay. And so right now we're finishing up the tour. We're going to talk a little bit about the future of the farm and the students involved. So can you tell us, Kim, what is in store for the dairy unit at North Carolina A&T?
Say that again.
Tell us what's in store for your dairy farm. What are the future plans?
So the future plan is, January of 2024, we'll be breaking grounds on a new milk ice cream parlor that will be on the opposite side of the pavilion. So eventually we'll be using a small percentage of our milk, not 100%, but just a small percentage of our milk will be going to the ice cream parlor, as well as we will be having a artificial insemination AI school that will be coming to the unit as well.
Okay, and talk to us a little bit about, because we haven't gotten a chance to talk about the students' involvement. Like, how are they involved? How do they play a role in the farm? And let's answer that, and then I have another question for you.
Okay, so we have volunteer workers as well as student workers that work out here. They are a vital part of the farm. They help us sustain a dairy farm. They basically is our eyes and our ears. Sometimes we may not catch, me or Corey might not catch things that they have brought to our attention that needs attention, as well as things that they basically, like things that we haven't seen, but they first lay their eyes on, they make sure they report it back to us. Before we switched over to the robot, they were our like number one group that was like milking. If outside of me or Corey, it was mainly the students that was milking in the old milk pit. But now that we have the robot, they sometimes help us push the cows through. But everything else that they help on the farm is pretty much like pertaining to like the pastures and things like that. But they are a very, very, very vital part of this farm. Some of our rewards that we have for our milk quality, we give that to the students because they are the reason why we have those awards.
Sure.
So, yeah.
And what talk just real quick, also talk a little bit about what role NCNT plays in the community. Like how does NCNT fit into the bigger picture of family farms, for instance, in North Carolina? Because we know that 97% or around 97% of US dairy farms are family owned. But research farms like A&T play a vital role in supporting those. So can you talk a little bit about that? And then maybe Dr. Mayo, if you have anything to add to this, I'd love to hear that too. But you go first, Kim.
So we have extensions. We help our community. So people that have small farms, they come to different events to gain more knowledge on what it is they're trying to do and just the overall view of agriculture, as well as extensions. They make sure that they help the community out with ones that want to basically migrate to a rural area that no longer want to be in the city. But we have a host of events at the pavilion around the community because not everybody want to live in the city, and some people want to only eat what they grow. And this is the place for them to come out here and get experience. We also have a community garden out here that we have volunteers, people from the community, and they help upkeep the community garden, and they really learn a lot of information.
I definitely got that family feel when I got to visit the farm in person and just feel that for sure. Dr. Maya, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so I would say I'd like to brag on Kim and Corey just a little bit. Pretty cool people, as you can tell. So we're actually sitting on about 500 acres of land here at the North Carolina A&T farm. And so they not only chip in and work on the dairy side, but we also have beef cattle, swine, poultry, goats, and sheep. I think that's everybody. And then we have a whole horticulture unit that produces fresh produce, that the produce actually gets donated to a lot of the charities in the community, as well as some of the nearby neighbors. And so that's a big component of just some of the too. Kim is a frequent flyer, I would say, on giving tours. At least 2 to 3 tours a week come through here, whether they're different age school students from elementary all the way up to high school, or just anybody who's interested in learning more about dairy farming. And so we have besides us on the 500 acres, we grow all of our own forages, which Kim and Corey are active a part of that during the summertime and getting things put up and stored and chopped and all of that. We also have a harvest team, we have on-site mechanics, and then we have units coordinators for all the other different units. So they all work together really like a family. We have our assistant superintendent and our superintendent, Douglas Jones and Daniel Cooper. And so they kind of help with the lay of the land. But of course, you know, Kim and Corey do quite a bit when it comes to that community outreach, and even taking animals to schools and things like that. They also, like Kim mentioned, are a big part of extension. So one of our extension is housed here. And so we are a part of the North Carolina Extension Group with North Carolina State. So when you see that little blue and the North Carolina Extension emblem, that's essentially representing North Carolina A&T's part in extension. We work a lot with small producers and underrepresented producers. We are actively working on a project, actually just started here shortly, that is trying to get in touch with more of the underrepresented farmers, specifically dairy farmers. We also do a lot of interactions with 4-H. So Corey in the summertime will host students from the city or from the urban area that have never been around animals, period. And so for a few weeks, they get to pretty much take care of their own heifer, learn how to walk her around, and then they get to show her at the Greensboro District Show in July. So I could go on all day bragging about them, but they and then from a researcher's perspective, they help out quite a bit with our research projects. So we have 3 faculty here that are currently in animal sciences that are working with the cows on the farm. And then we also have some food science. So usually whenever, and we also have some people from engineering as well that are starting to do some different research projects with drones and things like that. So they're always kind of a happy face on, ready to help, ready to keep moving and going. So,
and just if you could answer this question that we got, I don't want to not get to it, and then we'll finish up wrapping up, and we'll get to Kuda to give us some nutrition kind of overview. But we did get a question of what is the racial mix of dairy farmers?
Sure. So based on the 2017 census, and I'm working on getting more recent data, there were 37 farms of all of the dairy farms in the United States that were owned by Black dairy farmers. Majority, I think 8 of them were in Virginia. We were the only ones in North Carolina. There's some more in Kentucky and Florida, and I think maybe one in Louisiana. But for the most part, and unfortunately, as many farmers have gone out of business in 10 years, we know that those numbers have changed. But right now, we're the only fully functioning operating dairy of an underrepresented dairy farmer in the state of North Carolina. But we do have some farmers that are, have 2 or 3 cows that want to get into value-added products. So North Carolina Dairy Extension is big on providing workshops and teaching producers how to start a value-added project on their farm, whether that be a creamery or making cheese or anything like that. So that's our big focus, making all those different dairy products on farm and small farmers in North Carolina.
Well, that was awesome to hear that perspective and just hear how A&T is serving the community. I think that was a big learning curve for me about these research universities. So this has been a privilege of mine to introduce you to a dairy farm if you've never been before, and to be able to tour the dairy and just learn about the incredible work that's being done by Kim and Dr. Mayo. Thank you so much for sharing us your expertise today. So we're going to switch over and finish with Kuda so she can share some of her expertise and answer any questions that you might have. So Kuda, when we spoke recently, you mentioned this idea that dairy foods can support generational health and wealth. Can you elaborate on that for the group?
Yes, thank you very much, Kelly, and thank you, Dr. Mayo and Farmer Kim, for the great farm tour. This is my 6th farm tour, and every tour is different, so this was a great experience to do this virtually. But going back to your question, Kelly, I'm really passionate about nutrition. As a registered dietitian, I got into this work because I believe what we do in nutrition is really foundational for generational health and wealth. And so really, when we look at nutrition, it's a fundamental component to neurodevelopment and lifelong well-being. What we do know, however, is the reality is that health disparities in nutrition are inextricably linked. And this is important because we know diet quality is one of those modifiable risk factors for diseases, particularly diseases that affect people of color. And if I wanted to take a zoom into an area that we at the National Dairy Council are focusing on, is the health of Black Americans. What we know so far is that African Americans are 60% more likely than Hispanic white adults, non-Hispanic white adults, to have been diagnosed with diabetes, 50% more likely to have a stroke, 40% more likely to have high blood pressure, 30% more likely to die from heart disease, and have 1.3 times more likely to have obesity. Looking at our children, African American girls have the highest prevalence of obesity, and African American teens have the highest prevalence of high blood pressure. So addressing these health disparities, especially those related to nutrition, is front and center of our work at the National Dairy Council, and addressing these disparities from a very young age to ensure that we create or support that generational health and wealth is something that's important to us. The good news, again, as I mentioned, is that improving diet quality is one of those modifiable risk factors. And if I were to quote one of the Dietary Guidelines Committee members from 2010, Rafael Perez Escamilla, he is a researcher at Yale School of Public Health. He says if we really want to change the trajectory of health inequities and social justice issues, we need to start investing more in the first 1,000 days. This is from conception to 24 months. It was thought leaders like Raphael who understood this critical life stage paves the way for good nutrition and adoption of future nutrition guidance as the child grows older. Optimal nutrition can set a child up for future success, whereas poor nutrition in the first 1,000 days can contribute to irreversible brain damage to babies and really, again, predispose them or set them up for obesity, type 2 diabetes, hypertension, and other chronic diseases later in life. For us, again, the focus on the first 1,000 days is essential, and we need to consider even investing in the first 8,000 days, which includes, again, middle childhood all the way into adolescence, to ensure that we're promoting brain maturation, intense social engagement, and emotional control. Human development is a slow process and it takes 2 decades. That is the 8,000 days. And good nutrition is foundational to that and part of ensuring that we break that intergenerational cycle of poverty. What we know, though, is that healthy eating patterns that are recommended by Dietary Guidelines for Americans, which include the recommended servings of fruits, vegetables, whole grains, and low-fat dairy, will help meet these nutrient needs in the first 1,000 or 8,000 days and promote health and help prevent these chronic diseases that are disproportionately affecting Black people. We know that children and adolescents who adopt this healthy eating pattern will have more favorable neurocognitive development, stronger immunity, lower adiposity, support their bone and teeth development, and sets them up again for lifelong prevention of chronic diseases. I'll end by saying that every financial advisor says it's never too early to begin investing for retirement. And as a registered dietitian, I will agree with this and say it's never too early to begin investing in good eating behaviors that are recommended by the Dietary Guidelines for Americans. The foods we choose every day will contribute to dietary eating patterns that can promote our health and wellness and can reduce chronic disease risk and break that intergenerational cycle of poverty. So thank you very much, Callie, for allowing me to give these remarks, and congratulations again on a great dairy farm tour. Back over to you.
Yes, thank you so much, Kuda, for sharing this important information. I just want to add that we are going to be hosting a webinar in early 2024 to take a deeper dive into this, the latest research around health disparities and people of color, and hope that you will join us for that. We're going to share registration information with you once that webinar is scheduled. So I also just want to real quick, I know we're going a little bit over on time, but let you know there were a couple questions about Adopt a Cow. We're going to drop that link in the chat. Registration will open up back up in May, but there were some questions. I just want to address that in case you were curious about that. We hope today help provide some insight on dairy farming and dairy nutrition, and that you will leave with a deeper understanding of how milk makes it from farm to fridge. For those looking for continuing education credits that register on Zoom, you will receive a follow-up email within 24 hours of completion of the webinar with a CEU certificate attached. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. So we've shared a QR code on the screen and a link in the chat box to complete a post survey. If you would take a few minutes to complete that, we would really, really appreciate it. It helps us know what we can do better next time. And lastly, don't forget, the Dairy Alliance is your resource for all things dairy. Visit our website at thedairyalliance.com for the latest dairy research, recipes, and tips to manage lactose intolerance. You can even take more virtual farm tours and meet more of our incredible dairy farm families across the Southeast. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, Dr. Mayo. Thank you, Kuda. Everyone for joining us. We wish you a dairy good day. That's all for now.
That's it. Okay.